Hi folks. Now, I'm a great lover of social history, and I love looking at how society's values change and adapt over years and over centuries. It's quite amazing what is perfectly acceptable in one era can be viewed as being abhorrent in another era, and it's amazing how society adapts and changes to this. So today I wanted to talk to you about this amazing period in Scotland's history where large parts of Scotland were totally against alcohol, and especially against whisky. So, as you probably know, Scotland has a bit of a reputation as a nation which likes to drink, and especially to drink whisky. But as I was saying, it really wasn't all that long ago that there was this massive campaign that aimed to encourage all Scots to take a pledge not to drink what they called intoxicating liquor, which was primarily whisky. And really, this all started in 1829 when a gentleman called John Dunlop from Greenock. Greenock is a port city, shipbuilding town, right over on the west coast of Scotland, southwest from Glasgow, down the River Clyde. So this gentleman, John Dunlop, he founded the Glasgow and West of Scotland Temperance Society. And he came from a fairly wealthy landowning family, and he was appalled by the destitution that he saw, which alcohol abuse had brought on men and women and their families. And he felt very strongly that this was caused by lack of education, that lack of education lay at the heart of this problem, and that if only people could be educated about the evils of what you might call the demon drink, they could be convinced not to partake of alcohol, or to reduce the amount of alcohol they would take, especially, as I said, what you might call hard liquor, i.e. whisky. So they called them ardent spirits in those days, at the start of the temperance movement. So that was really aimed at, as I said, whisky, also what's called fortified wines. But generally, lighter wines, ordinary wines and beers were seen as being acceptable at the start of the temperance movement. So what happened was he organised a meeting, his very first meeting, and he made this speech declaring that he would forever abstain from partaking in spirits. So this, on that fateful evening, it was in Greenock, Monday the 5th of October 1829, and on that evening 4 other men stood up and made a pledge to do the same after hearing John Dunlop speak. And so began this extraordinary movement, which ultimately spread throughout Great Britain. And it all started that night in Greenock, through in the west of Scotland. So let's go back a bit and think, well, how did all this come about? Well, really, there were a few issues at play here. So it wasn't just one issue. There was a couple of things that sort of came together by coincidence, as it were. But basically, the temperance movement and the animosity against whisky came about because there was a huge increase in whisky consumption in Scotland between 1822 and 1829. So over that space of 7 years, whisky consumption trebled in Scotland. and I'm going to tell you why, how this came about. Trebled, can you imagine that? So the first thing that impacted on it was that illegal whisky distilling and whisky smuggling was endemic in the Highlands, and it was a huge problem. And the government tried to tackle this in quite what was a very innovative way, by organising a licence for the distilling of whisky and reducing taxation. So just to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, at that time up in the Highlands, so this is all through the 1700s, it was massive into the early 1800s. There were many, tens and tens of thousands of illegal, illicit whisky stills in the Highlands. Often they were set up in isolated areas where there was a good supply of water. And funnily enough, some of them only distilled at night under the light of the moon, hence the nickname moonshine. So government excise men scoured the Highlands trying to stamp these out. And I read that as many as 14,000 illegal whisky stills were confiscated in 1 year. 14,000. And yet, as fast as the excise men could find them and close them down, new ones would open up. And it was estimated at this time that at least half of all the whisky that was consumed in Scotland had evaded tax. There was no tax paid on it. It was all illegal whisky smuggled down from the Highlands to the main markets in the lowlands. So, in an attempt to resolve this issue, in 1823, an Act of Parliament was enacted called the Excise Act. And actually, interestingly, it was proposed by the Duke of Gordon, and on whose lands, up in Strathspey, some of the finest illegal whiskies were being distilled. And nowadays, some of the finest illegal whiskies are produced up there. You may have heard of Glenfiddich, for instance, and many others, Speyside whiskies, absolutely wonderful. Anyway, it was the Duke of Gordon that proposed this act called the Excise Act. And so that would allow people to apply to be a legal distillery. And they would pay a licence fee of £10. And then there was a flat rate tax on the whisky of 2 shillings and 10 pence per gallon. So as an aside there, if you had watched my video about the old, what was called LSD money system that was in use in Scotland for centuries, right up until the 1970s, you would know what is 2 shillings and 10 pence in today's money. Well, I'll tell you, it is 2 shillings and 10 pence. It is, I think, 14 pence. So that's probably around 15, 16 US cents. The same in euro cents, 15, 16 euro cents, somewhere around about that, per gallon. So it was quite a low tax point. So overnight, this Excise Act worked. Overnight, the illicit stills and the whisky smuggling disappeared because many of the larger distilleries opted quite rightly to become legal distilleries. And in fact, this Excise Act is considered one of the key initiatives that helped Scotch whisky on its path to what you might call worldwide success. It was this Act of Parliament that did it, that legalised things and set up a framework. So that was good, in a way, that it got rid of the illegal whisky stills, smuggling, and larger distilleries were formed and went on to produce better quality whisky. But this is what also kicked in, and is exactly at the same time, a new method of a better method of producing whisky had been invented. So prior to this, this new method is called the continuous distillation process. For those of you who maybe have toured distilleries, you would probably have heard it. So prior to this, especially in the illegal distilleries, whiskey was distilled just in batches. So they would just make a batch of whiskey, and then they would, the next day or next week, they would make another batch of whiskey. And what happened there was you got hugely variable quality. Obviously, some of it would be appallingly bad. And if any of you have ever tasted illegal whiskey, I have, and it wasn't Scottish whiskey. It was when I was in Ireland, and somebody very kindly gave me a taste of, I think they call it bachin. It was illegal whiskey. Oh, it was horrible, absolutely horrible. Anyway, so this new distillation process, the continuous distillation process, made it much easier to produce a consistent quality whiskey, and one which was generally lighter and much less fierier than these illegal stills had been producing. So that happened at the same time. So as a consequence, what happened was that within a short space of time, larger quantities of much better whiskey, which was also cheaper, came onto the market. And as an aside, this is what if you've been looking at my videos, I sometimes refer to this. This is what you'd call the law of unintended consequences. So in other words, there was two things at play here. One was the government trying to stamp out illegal distilling and poor quality whiskey, and then there was a gentleman, worked hard to invent a better process for producing a much better quality and a consistent quality whiskey. So these two things kick in, and what you get is a lot more whiskey available, which is better quality, i.e. so better to drink, and it's cheaper. So what happened, as we were talking back at the starting, was consumption trebled in the space of 7 years. So this caused lots of what you might call social ills, and people became hugely concerned about it. So things like bad behaviour, loutish bad behaviour, domestic violence especially was terrible, obviously mostly aimed at women, child neglect, immorality, increased crime, poverty and destitution, and then ill health and much higher mortality rates. So all these social ills came sweeping through Scotland, and many people, as like Mr. John Dunlop, were appalled by them and determined to do something about it. And I thought that was the really interesting bit about it, determined to do something about it. So what happened was that temperance societies were formed, these societies called Temperance Societies. There were many of them. Often there was a strong link between the society and religion, and most temperance societies were built upon Christian beliefs, and they all had different names. Some of them, I'm sure there are many. Reading about it, I know there are many, but some of them, for instance, the Scottish Temperance League was quite well known, the Independent Order of Rechabites, the Band of Hope, I think was quite a well-known one, the Independent Order of Good Templars, and the British Women's Temperance Association. It was interesting that quite a few of these societies did not only the temperance thing, but they did other things as well. And it was interesting reading about the British Women's Temperance Association was by and large the first time that women had felt able to actively be involved in you might say politics, for instance, because they were arguing for changes in the law. So these temperance societies, they would hold regular, often weekly meetings for the members to come along to, and they also published large amounts of pamphlets and educational materials which all promoted abstinence from alcohol and the benefits of that. Now, I was quite amazed that I wasn't totally aware of this, but during this period in Scotland, children as young as 12 years old could legally be served alcohol in public houses. So educating children about the what you might call the evils of drink and the dangers of drink was always an important element of the temperance societies and the work that they did. So as well as the regular meetings, they did lots of other things. They would have rallies, but I thought it was quite interesting that they also did things like they would organise evening soirees where they would perhaps have singing and poetry reading and recitations and such like, and also daytime excursions to interesting places. So these were all organised to show that fun could be had without alcohol being consumed, and the whole families would be invited along to attendees and to enjoy a nice day out or a nice evening out. So these became quite important elements of the whole Temperance Societies. In addition to this, hotels called Temperance Hotels sprung up where no alcohol was available. And I've got a picture here of one in the Royal Mile, which actually is opposite, or was opposite, where one of my shops used to be, where one of our jewellery shops used to be in the Royal Mile. So I wasn't aware that existed, but that was a Temperance hotel. So these special hotels for people that wanted to stay in a hotel where there was no alcohol served and they weren't bothered with drunken behaviour. Also, this was at the time where there was a great expanse in coffee houses and tea rooms and refreshment rooms as an alternative. And I think this was the period where Mrs. Cranston's tea rooms in Glasgow became very, very popular, and the place to be, as it were. So a lot of them sprang up in Scotland throughout the 19th century, throughout the 1800s. So with the Temperance Societies, what then happened in Scotland? What became this I was going to call it a ritual. I don't think it would have been seen as a ritual, but something that you do. And it was called taking the pledge. So this is something that people would talk about and they would do. They were going to as individuals, they were going to publicly, it was usually publicly, in front of a congregation, in front of members of the society, in front of their family, in front of friends, publicly, they were going to proclaim that they would refrain from drinking strong liquor, hard liquor, or intoxicating liquor. That was the phraseology that they would use. And this was a big thing, taking the pledge. It was a phrase that was widely used. So this was not just something that was to one specific part of Scotland. This spread right out throughout, although it started in the west of Scotland, and it was very, very strong in the west of Scotland, mostly because I think of the industrial background to life there, and big cities such as Glasgow. But it spread throughout Scotland, and was a very, very strong movement. So just to show you, I suppose, how it's some personal history here, to show you this point, I'm going to show you my own family Bible from that period in time. And here you're going to see one of my MacDonald forefathers. So on the MacDonald side, I wouldn't say that we would have been renowned as teetotalers, to say that from what I can gather. Anyway, so I have so I'm going to show you my family Bible, and I'm going to show you the bit where, as I said, one of my ancestors, William MacDonald, he publicly declares by signing in the family Bible that he would renounce alcohol for 1 year. And then separately, I'm going to show you June's, my wife June's family, where one of the daughters there gets a certificate for, again, taking the pledge. So this is our old family Bible, which dates from quite a long time ago, early 1800s. And I'm just going to try and flick over to a page. It actually lies right at the end of the Old Testament. So here you can see my ancestor, William MacDonald, and it was on July says William MacDonald joined the pledge for 1 year not to taste strong liquor, and he's had to sign it. I'm not very good at this type of camera work, I'm afraid, but you can maybe see that a bit better now. So I thought that was really interesting, especially like he had to sign it. I'm kind of assuming that somebody else perhaps wrote it and then William signed his name. But that was him doing it for a period of 1 year, taking the pledge and signing in the family Bible. So this is a Temperance Pledge certificate that comes from June's family side. So on her mother's side, June's a Simpson, and they were from the Borders, and they ran woolen mills down in the Borders. And for a while they also ran one in Carlisle, and you can see this one has come from this, which is just over the border into England, and this one has come from the city of Carlisle. This is where this certificate's originated, and it's a relative of an ancestor of June's called Andriana Simpson, and this is her taking the pledge as she leaves school, and she's pledging to abstain from the use of intoxicating drink as a beverage. So in total, she's taken the pledge not to drink alcohol, and again she signed it. It was interesting. June's granny. This was not June's granny. June's granny, as far as I'm aware, never ever drank alcohol her entire life, and she lived well into her 90s. So that's maybe a lesson for all of us there. But anyway, I thought that was quite interesting that they actually took a pledge on leaving the school and starting work that they wouldn't drink intoxicating liquor. So I hope you could see there that this was something that was taken seriously, and I often wondered when I saw that in the family Bible. When I was a child I saw it. I think my granny pointed it out to me. That I did often wonder, did William MacDonald, did he do that voluntarily, or was that like his wife or his mother or his whatever family standing over him saying, you better take the pledge, sign that Bible. Anyway, the temperance movement in Scotland started to decline after the Second World War. Which, I don't know, it depends on your views. Some people might say regrettably, or some people might say, oh, it was much better that we moved on from that. Anyway, after the Second World War, really restrictions on alcoholic consumption in Scotland over the next 50 years were gradually eased. Most latterly back in the 1990s, I think, there was quite a move. But they were gradually eased over that whole period. Until we get to the present situation in Scotland, where we have pretty liberalised alcohol licensing laws, with alcohol freely available to everybody, and you can drink pretty much all the time. So that's the situation we have now. Now, June and I are no teetotalers, so it's not as if I am doing this video from the background of being a teetotaler myself. We are not. We enjoy drinking socially. But in researching this, and I was always aware of the Bible and my forefathers, signing the pledge. I was always aware of that in the temperance movement. But I was just amazed that for well over 100 years, I mean, we were talking about a span of 120, 150 years, many, many, many ordinary people in Scotland, in a genuine desire to improve society and their lives, and everybody's lives, banded together and to try and force through changes in alcohol laws. And I think you really have to admire them for that. And who knows? As I said right at the start, social history shows that values and thoughts change. Who's to say that future generations won't agree to them and may decide that, we should return to being a more temperate society? Well, Again, I hope you enjoyed that little insight into aspects of Scotland's history. If you do, please, as usual, give me a like, leave a comment. I love reading your comments. I try my very best to reply to as many as I can. And until we meet again, I just want to wish you, as usual, all the very best from Scotland.